Yadri Tippits is apparently a very, very important man. Who's Yadri Tippits? If you'll remember from the Gulthius tree video, I had mentioned that there was a priest of the god of travel who was struck lame. That was Yadri Tippits. I can tell you, there's so many different ways I could talk about him. Let's start with the name, Yadri Tippits. I can tell you right now that Yadri, Yadri, I have no clue where I came up with that name, but it seems like something that I took from somewhere. Not as it is, not that word I saw somewhere and took it, but it seems like some letters somehow came together that way. It is an anagram of diary, but that's definitely not where it came from. And then Tippets, I can guarantee you, came from me just sitting back and trying to think up a last name for this guy. And the word tip came to mind, and then I just turned it into Tippets. So that's the name out of the way. Part two, why is he so important? Well, the reason why I know he's so important is that going back to those files where the Hoach background was, remember how the Hoach was a couple pages long? Yadri Tippett's Word document was 6 pages long. That is insane. 6 pages on a single dude. Luckily, part of that was just recounting the story of, like in actual story form, how Yadri first encountered the druid and then their fight and then the rise of the Golthius tree and all that. So, not too much. What purpose did Yadri serve in the original campaign? The original thinking was that I wanted the runes of Trocare to be far enough away from the town that the PCs sort of had to set out for it. So I wanted it to be like a day's walk or so. It would seem like an actual trip, not just like a jaunt down to the store, but this journey, as short as it was, a journey over to the ruins and then a journey back. The problem was when you journey about a day's walk away from town and you get seriously injured in the ruins, how do the PCs deal with that? How would they get healed back up? What if one of them caught a debilitating disease or a curse or something? There would need to be someone nearby who could deal with that. And so I said, how about a roadside shrine? And there would be a cleric there. And since it's a roadside shrine, it must be a shrine to. Back then, this was before I created the gods for Trocare, so it was just Farlingen, which is the Greyhawk god of travel. And and then I said to myself, well, I mean, priests of Farlingen, they have to travel. They always have these roadside shrines, and then the priests, as they travel by, they'll stop for a day or so, tend to the shrine, and then go on to the next one. And so you would like never meet the same guy twice. So there'd be no way for the PCs to build up a rapport. And that's when I decided somehow this priest would have to have been struck lame. He couldn't walk anymore, and so he would have to permanently tend this shrine. And that's how that whole story got started. It also served another purpose in that if he was lame and couldn't go anywhere, that would explain why he never went with the PCs into the ruins. If they brought the wounded to him, he could heal them, but he would never be able to go to the ruins and delve down there with them. And this was important because he needed to be of a higher level, at least fourth to seventh level, somewhere in there, because he needed to be a high enough level to cast powerful healing spells and the remove disease spell, things like that. And so everything worked out. You take the mechanical bits that you need from the guy. These are the game rule considerations, the overarching purpose of this character in the game, and then you flesh it out with an actual interesting, plausible backstory. And so everything makes sense. That's how I like to work. Now, Yadri, I had to come up with some quirks for him because obviously I was specifically going out of my way to make sure that this was a character the PCs would interact with often. He was a rumor mill, obviously, going back to some of his purposes. Since he tended this this shrine to travelers, people who traveled by stopped in would share stories with him, and so he could pass on rumors to the PCs, in addition to being a healer. I just turned and looked at the picture. This is from the comic Goblins, which is actually it's an awesome webcomic that explores what life is like. At first, it started out the first bits of it were what's life like for a goblin in D&D, and then the goblins took PC class levels, and now they're heroes and head out and do adventures. All right, getting back to Yadri because he's the purpose here, and we'll get to the reason why I chose a forest scene for him. Although, I mean, it's kind of obvious when I already told you about the connection to the Gulthias tree. Yadri had to have some quirks. So I decided one, since he was a priest of the god of travel and he couldn't leave the shrine. I mean, he could walk. I mean, he's lame, but he's lame where he could, hobble around with a cane. So he would gather wood from nearby and he would carve walking sticks because that is an obvious thing for a priest of the god of travel to do. And he could even enchant these walking sticks just as they are. He could give you like a masterwork quarterstaff. Those are the cheapest masterwork weapon you can get because a quarterstaff in and of itself costs nothing. And getting a masterwork quarterstaff, then you just pay the masterwork upgrade cost. But he could give you a masterwork quarterstaff. It's meant to be a walking stick, but it's also particularly well balanced and can be used as a weapon. And he also had magically enhanced walking sticks, not as like +1 weapons or what have you, but with special powers such that when you use them, you wouldn't fatigue from marching long distances. Things like that. Just little quote unquote pointless mechanical benefits. Because how often do DMs pay attention to the fatigue from forced marching rule? Never. So this is a good reason why you could ignore it. So that's sort of one little quirk. The other little quirk that he had, the major quirk that he has, actually, what has become his defining quirk, is that he is a connoisseur of rainwater. What does that mean? I had this image of him after it rains. Well, I'll get to that in one sec. Clerics in D&D can cast it's a 0 level spell. It's the most basic spell they have and it's called create water. And they can just create, one or more gallons of water several times a day. So they never want for water. Their cup runneth over with water. The problem was he doesn't like the taste of the water. Funny enough, the God-given heavenly water that he gets from his spells doesn't taste very good to him. He uses it to brew tea. What he does like when it comes to water is when it rains. He goes out into the forest after it rains and he collects the rainwater that drips off of certain flowers or leaves or other plants because he has a highly developed palate and he can actually taste subtle differences in the rainwater based on which plant it was collected from. And it was just a pointless little thing that I was thinking of. At one point, I was trying to think of adventures for small children. And one of them, because when you have really, smaller children, you don't want them going off and fighting and killing orcs with swords sometimes. Sometimes that's a little bit too violent. But heading out into the forest and collecting rainwater from certain plants for the lame priest who lives in the roadside shrine, that seems a little bit more up my rated G alley. And plus, PCs who aren't hobbling around with a cane would be able to go further afield and collect the better rainwater from other plants for him to try. And it's a painstaking process because when you're talking about the rainwater coming off a plant after it's done raining, it's much too dangerous for him to head out while it's raining, just in case he slips and falls and can't get back up or what have you. So he can only collect the few precious drops that are left after it's done raining. And what's the point of that? Well, I mean, it's just a character quirk. He can offer players glasses of water and expect them to discern the different tastes, and obviously they're going to be like, that's weird and stupid. Of course we can't tell the difference in taste of the water depending on what plant leaf it came off of. He can, however. And this ties into the spark for my doing this video now. Every once in a while, I do some philosophy based off of D&D ideas. And a couple I guess in December of last year, so eight months ago, I wrote a post on my blog about conditional perfection. And what is conditional perfection? It is basically making perfection a relevant term. In other words, what is perfect depends on the situation or the circumstances. And it came out of my dinner at Subway one night. See, I drink Diet Coke, but I sometimes mix in little spurts of other flavors. Because if you give me like a cup full of Diet Coke, and then you add like one little squirt of cherry Coke into it, I can taste the cherry Coke. And so that's all it takes for me to enjoy a Diet Cherry Coke flavored soda. And I was thinking, depending on which sub I get, depends on which flavor of soda I would drink. If I got a turkey sub, I'd want a sweeter drink, and so I would go with cherry or Sprite added in with my Coke. But if I had a roast beef sub, I don't want a sweet drink. I want something a little bit bitier, as I term it. So I would get like a Barks root beer or a Dr. Pepper added into my Diet Coke. And that was where conditional perfection came from as an idea. This idea of conditional perfection. And I immediately applied it to Yadri. Yadri is someone who who gets these different tastes, these very subtle tastes, but something that he can still pick out off of the different plants. And so that immediately related to my little squirts of soda in my cup of Diet Coke. And so he can preach about conditional perfection. Some things are perfect then, other things are perfect in those other situations. And that, in turn, ties back into his little origin story when he decided to fight this druid in order to put the road through the forest. There are certain times when a road straight through the forest is a perfect decision, and there are certain times when a road straight through the forest is not the perfect decision. And he unfortunately learned the hard way when that road was not the perfect decision. I should probably give him in the sandbox game. Let's welcome 15-minute time limit. I've got 2 minutes left to talk about the sandbox game. He will not exist in the sandbox game as a cleric in a roadside shrine out in the wilderness. He could, but he won't. Instead, he will just be a guy who lives in the town of Windhaven, but way out by the wall. And when it rains, he leaves out into the dangerous wilderness to collect his rainwater. And he can still serve the same function of selling PCs magically enhanced travel supplies. This guy would be a travel supplier. He himself would still be lame. He would still be a cleric of a god of travel, and he could still supply rumors and that travel equipment, mundane, masterwork, and magical. But, he would no longer be out there. He would no longer have anything to do with the Golthius tree, that kind of thing. Although if you ever learned of the Golthius tree, I'm pretty sure he'd be interested in some rainwater collected from it. I wonder how that would taste, though, knowing that you have this evil vampire demon tree, and then you're going to drink the rainwater off of it. I guess I'll end this with one last little idea. When I first looked at this, I didn't know that there was this goblin here. I completely missed it. What I was paying attention to were these, I guess, flowers or grasses or cattails or whatever they are, because they look like spears. These ones don't so much because they're curved, but these ones were all standing straight up, and so they look like spears. And I always figured that those were goblins hiding in the grass with their spears pointing up, and so I want to steal that idea while I'm at it, and have goblins hiding in grasses with their spears specifically camouflaged as these cattail-like plants, so that you can't tell where they are or where they're not. And that will end this video, so bye-bye.